Good afternoon, everybody in the room and online, and welcome to Healthy Living Together. Healthy Living Together is a project that was developed by McKenzie Health Systems and in collaboration with several partners, including Sanilac County Community Mental Health, the Sanilac County Health Department, MSU Extension, Start Collaborative, and that's it. Today, if you are online, a few housekeeping items. Your audio is automatically muted. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screens to ask a question. And please note that this event will be recorded with the links sent following the presentation. Our speaker today is Christian Wright. And my question for you is, often when we hear the term attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, what often comes to mind? We really don't think about adults more than likely, but we think about young people, maybe a child or a youth, maybe even a male instead of a female. But the fact is that ADHD can impact adults as well. Christian brings a very practical perspective to the help that he provides the people he serves, while enlisting a holistic approach and evidence-based practices. Before coming to work at Sanilac County Community Mental Health, Christian served as a foster care advocate for the state of Michigan, where he worked with children and families managing trauma, attachment disruptions, and behavioral challenges. In his current role as a care manager, Christian assists people in their day-to-day lives and challenges as they navigate life's complexities while living with ADHD or another mental health challenge. Christian holds an associate's degree in holistic health, a bachelor's degree in psychology, and is currently working on pursuing a master's degree in counseling. Please welcome Christian Wright in his presentation, Adults Living with ADHD.
Hello, everybody. My name is Christian Wright. I'm a care manager at Sanilac County Health, and a little more about what that entails is I'll do intakes, I do crisis work, I help manage treatment plans, I help people write their treatment plans, and then review the treatment plans every quarter. I also link and coordinate services and community resources. And before we get started today, I'd like to start with a brief mindfulness exercise, because mindfulness is a key skill in managing adult ADHD. You could just take a few moments. Just bring your attention to the present moment. Start by observing, maybe noticing what you smell or hear, noticing the sounds in the background, noticing what's happening around you. Maybe the feeling of the chair you're sitting on, the temperature of the air, or the sounds you can hear. There's no need to change anything. Just notice what is, like a curious scientist. Now let's move to describing. Simply put words to what you're observing without adding judgment. Maybe you notice cool air on my face, or feet touching the floor, or maybe even I'm feeling a little distracted right now. Just label it simply and gently. Finally, let's participate. Bring yourself to be fully here in this experience. If your mind wanders, and it might, that's okay. Gently bring your attention back, just like you would kindly guide a friend. You don't have to get it perfect. Mindfulness is about practicing awareness, not clearing your mind or doing it right. Let's take one more deep easy breath together. And when you're ready, gently bring your focus back to the room, feeling grounded and ready to move into our work together today. So what is it? Another skill with ADHD is organization. It's something that is really essential for people who have ADHD. And I'd like to model that a little bit today by just going over what we're going to be talking about. First, we're going to define what ADHD is. We're going to talk about common symptoms that people with ADHD may experience. We'll talk about how ADHD is diagnosed and different challenges with that. We're also going to talk about strengths, because a lot of times with mental health disorders, we historically have focused on deficits, hence the name, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But it's important for therapeutic outcomes to focus on strengths as well. A strength-based approach is a significant predictor of beneficial therapeutic outcomes. And then after talking about it, we're gonna, some of us, maybe we'll be wondering, do I have ADHD? The common, medical student syndrome. When you focus on something, sometimes you think, oh, I do that, I do this. And a lot of mental health diagnoses are exponentialized or elevated characteristics that are common in everyone. So we might have a lot of things in common with people with ADHD and yet still not have ADHD, or it's exacerbated and elevated in somebody with ADHD. And then after that, we're going to talk about what people with ADHD can do. Like, what if you have ADHD, what are your options? What are some things that can help with that? And then I have some homework that I'm going to pass out, because I know how much everybody loves homework. And from there, we'll go to some Q&As. But if questions come up along the way, definitely feel free to put it in the chat, or to raise your hand, or just blurt it out. And we'll pause and go over it. Hopefully I can answer it, and if not, we can follow up later. And then I'll offer some resources. There's different resources. There's a couple websites. There's a couple of really good books on ADHD. So what is ADHD? It's a neurodevelopmental disorder. It's not a personality flaw. It's not bratty children. It's a measurable neurological developmental difference from the average person. And it's characterized by a persistent pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity impulsivity. Some of the brain differences with people with ADHD is there's reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is a lot of the higher functioning aspects of our brains, impulse control, working memory, and organizational skills, those types of brain functions. There's also altered dopamine regulation, which is our reward system. So people with ADHD, they can measure the reward system differences, different things that spike the dopamine, how it interacts in the brain. And then there's also structural differences in the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. We can see there are size differences in the brain structures and neural activity differences on different scans. And how common is it? In 2023, an estimated 15.5 million people, which is approximately 6% of the population, have ADHD. And only about half of those received a diagnosis in adulthood. So once they were already 18 years old. 25% of adults think they might have it, suspect it, but only a little more than half of those have consulted a doctor or mental health professional. And then something else that's noteworthy is about 39% of children who are diagnosed with ADHD still continue to present with symptoms or need therapeutic interventions into adulthood. And some of these numbers change. They've been changing over the years. I did like a deep dive on research, and it does look like ADHD prevalence is increasing. And we don't really know if that's because we're getting better at diagnosing it and recognizing it, or if it's because it's becoming more common. Some of the common symptoms are difficulty focusing or sustaining attention, hyperactivity, moving around a lot, having a hard time sitting still. In adults, that might be seen as restlessness or just always being on the go, always having to task, all that. Some common overlap with the stereotypical type A personality. And then being easily distracted by noises. People with ADHD, if you've ever been taking a test and somebody's tapping a pencil and you just cannot focus, that would be what that easily distracted would be a good example of. And then forgetfulness and losing items, losing your keys all the time, losing your wallet, your debit card, forgetting to show up for your appointments. Those things come up. And then executive, I always want to say executive, it's executive dysfunction. And we're going to talk about that a little more next. Restlessness is also another good sign. So what is executive dysfunction? It's dysfunction primarily with the prefrontal cortex in the brain and working memory, impulse control, attention. And people are having a hard time with increased procrastination, challenges with planning and organization, time management difficulties, issues with completing tasks, like starting tasks and then not completing them, and difficulty with multi-step instructions. This is a common one where, say you have an employee that's working for you, and you say, I need you to do this, 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 and this, and this, and then they come back and half of it's not wrong. That could be from ADHD. It's not necessarily that they're trying not to get it done right, it's that they're having a hard time following all of those instructions. So something like a list would be really helpful for somebody with ADHD. And so they can do the one thing, check it off, go to the next thing. And then long-term goal setting and planning, those are also challenges. And then a big thing is a self-control and impulsivity. Maybe they quit their job because they got upset, or they bought a new car, and they're not thinking things through, they're excited. They have a really hard time when they get excited or upset at something, like maintaining that long-term focus and making an impulsive action. And it could also be reckless behavior as well, like speeding or yelling at somebody. And it's not that they're being a bad person or intentionally being reckless. It's their brain just doesn't stop. They don't have necessarily the prefrontal activity to pause and think, oh, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I don't want to quit my job because I need to pay my bills. And it's more of an afterthought, like, oh, I quit my job because I got upset, and now I got to figure out how to pay the bills. Now that I've made ADHD sound really daunting, I'd like to shift focus. And we can talk about strengths a little bit, because there are measurable strengths. There's been a lot of research on this, and the most important part of talking about the strengths is that people who have a strength-based outlook on ADHD tend to have more strengths with ADHD. So it's actually kind of a CBT technique, which I'm going to go into a little bit more later too, called cognitive restructuring, where maybe you have an outlet of, oh, I always do this, and shifting that into, I've done this at different times and I'm getting better. And it's just reprogramming how you think about things. And that's really important with ADHD, because there are key strengths. There's dual impact of these traits. So the same trait that might cause you issues in school could be really, really good in sports. And resilience and growth. People with ADHD tend to have really high levels of resilience and they have a lot of interest. And so they grow in a lot of areas. Their brains tend to be very creative. And if they're looking at this as something that's disabling, that's going to cause more challenge than looking at it as something that's creative or beneficial. And I'm not saying use that as an excuse of, oh, I have ADHD, so I just have to be this way. I'm always late for work. You can't fire me. No, you still need to show up for work on time. But let's find some ways that we can focus on the benefits too. Maybe you want to be more creative at work and thinking outside the box. People with ADHD tend to have high levels of courage too, and tend to be very adventurous because they're seeking the dopamine hit from the reward system. So how do we diagnose? So it's a multifaceted process. There's a lot of new technology coming out too. I was just talking with a coworker today about some neuropsychological tests that people are doing for measuring the brain activity of people with ADHD. But commonly it's going to be, if say you think, oh, I have ADHD, I'm going to go to CMH. I want to see if I can get some therapy or maybe some medication, just see what my options are, see if I have ADHD. Then you would come in and do a biopsychosocial assessment, which is a comprehensive assessment. There's going to be a clinical interview. We're going to go over the diagnostic criteria of the DSM-5, which is this book. This is actually the older edition. I don't have a paper copy of the new one. I usually use PDF copies, the digital books. But the DSM criteria for ADHD, I'm not going to torture you with today. It's about 2.5 pages long. If you do want a copy of that, you can send me an email and I'll send you a copy of the specific criteria. And then multiple sources of information. It's really good. You want to do, maybe you're doing a clinical interview with an intake worker and then with your therapist. And sometimes it can take a little while to get an accurate diagnosis of ADHD. Also, maybe you're doing a psychological evaluation or a psychiatric evaluation to kind of see if it's showing up in these different areas. And also, looking back on your childhood, did you have these symptoms? Was this an issue in childhood that was just never diagnosed? Looking back on, okay, like when you were a kid, how did you behave? What was your family history like? We also have screening tools and questionnaires that we can use for ADHD. And then it's really important to rule out other conditions. Yes?
Just a quick question. Is it faster to go to your medical doctor and get a brain scan?
If your medical doctor has that capability.
Oh, okay. I mean, since that kind of shows it, I guess, in one of your earlier slides.
Yes, it can, and that's a new technology. The issue I'm running into with that personally is accessibility and cost.
Okay.
Which is, I'm really hopeful that someday every doctor is going to have that, every CMH is going to have that. And it really, at the end of the day, it comes back to training and funding.
Okay.
And challenges with diagnosis, late diagnosis. A lot of people were missed when they were kids with the because they were functional enough. And one of the key elements to a diagnosis is that it must be getting in the way of function or development. And some people, it is getting in the way, but they're masking enough because they've learned just enough coping skills to kind of piece it together. But that doesn't mean they're functioning to their fullest capability. There's also a lot high comorbidity, which just means that you have two or more conditions, basically, with depression and anxiety are two of the biggest ones. And so a lot of times people will get misdiagnosed with anxiety when it's really ADHD, or both, or depression, or maybe they have both. A lot of times people with ADHD will also have other health conditions. And then gender bias. Now there is some, with the research, there are mixed results on this, but I found more research that said there was a historical gender bias because women would tend to more predominantly exhibit the inattentive qualities of ADHD as opposed to the hyperactivity, which is more noticeable. And so it would kind of be under the radar, less, it was less disruptive in school, less disruptive at home, And so it was just overlooked. And then stigma. There's a lot of misconceptions about ADHD where people think it's just a childhood disorder. And oh, you grow up. And some people do, they learn to cope with it, they learn to deal with it, they don't necessarily grow out of it. And then a lot of times symptoms are masked by coping strategies. And we have cultural stigma in general still. I don't know how we still do, but with mental health challenges in general and developmental disorders, a lot of times people are like, oh, I don't want to see a therapist. Like, I don't want people to judge me. I don't want this or that. Fortunately, we do have HIPAA laws, so it's all confidential. But it can be, I can understand not wanting that label, not wanting to be looked at as different. And at the same time, it's really balancing. Is this getting in the way of my life to the point where going in and risking that potential diagnosis, and the stigma and the fear, overcoming that so that you can get help and function better in life. And then another part is people oftentimes with ADHD, they think they just have character flaws or personality flaws. It's like, oh, if I just work harder, if I just have more willpower, I'll be on time. Or they think they can mentally force their way out. And they don't think, oh, this could actually be a neurodevelopmental difference. So current research findings. This is the part where I get excited because I love when we find new things in science and it starts to change. Emotional dysregulation. Now this is not currently in the diagnostic criteria. So the diagnostic criteria is you have to have a pattern of inattention, meeting specific criteria, or hyperactivity and impulsivity. But research is showing that approximately 48% of people with ADHD struggle with emotional dysregulation and having a really hard time being aware of their emotions and being able to control their emotions. So some current researchers are proposing, they're saying, hey, we need to look at this a little more and maybe add this as a third core cluster into the DSM diagnosis. So for all we know, in the next rendition, the DSM-6, maybe we'll have a third core cluster. And it's important to look at that. And at this point, it would have to be seen as like a comorbid mood disorder because it's not in the diagnostic criteria, but it's still important to look at and help because there are definitely therapies and medications and lifestyle changes that can help with the inattention, the hyperactivity, and emotional dysregulation. Neurofeedback is also really wonderful thing that we're starting to get some good research on, which is you hook your brain up to this machine and you do these different tasks, and your ability from doing those tasks, it shows you your brain waves and how they're interacting, and you can physically control your brain waves to a degree. There's people they call like learners versus non-learners. Some people are more apt to be able to do that. They pick up on it more quickly, but the people who are able to do it, it's shown really good results. And then we're also finding out that it's hereditary. It's actually one of the most hereditary mental health diagnoses. It's about 80% chance that it was inherited if you have it, according to the research, which is relatively new. And those numbers we're kind of seeing those increase. So now we're at the part of, I think I might have ADHD because we've been talking about it for the last half an hour. So what can you do? You can call your doctor and you can talk to your doctor. You can call Access. So if you want to come to CMH and you want to do an intake and go through the process and maybe see about what treatment options you can get at CMH, first you have to call this number. It's Access. And we'll pass that out at the end. Or you should already have a copy on your slides. And you call them and you do a phone call and kind of tell them what's going on and how it's disrupting your ability to function, and that you're wanting to see what kind of help you can get. And then you come in and you'll do an intake, and then you'll come back in and we'll do a treatment plan. That's how it tends to work. So maybe you've already been diagnosed, or you do get diagnosed. What are some things that can help? Therapy and support. There's also medication. I will briefly touch on medication, but I'm not a psychiatrist. That's definitely not my area of expertise. And then there's also lifestyle changes, which is the one that I'm actually most passionate about, because you can take medication and you can receive therapy, and if you do those things and you do the lifestyle changes, you're going to have significantly better outcomes. That's a lot of times with the Western culture, we think, oh, I just want this pill, or I just want to do this thing and then be fit, because we think there's something wrong with us. And really, it's an operational challenge that we're having, where maybe you're having gut issues and you just want a medication to fix it, but you don't want to change the way you eat. It's kind of the same way with ADHD, because there's a lot of phytonutrients and minerals and exercise and different things that actually have a significant impact on function. So different therapies that work. Cognitive behavioral therapy is wonderful for people with ADHD. It's really focusing on different techniques and therapies and mindsets that help shift the way we think. And then dialectical behavioral therapy, which is one of my personal favorites, called DBT, which gets really confusing, and it's technically a third wave CBT therapy, which makes it even more confusing. CBT has evolved over time. It started out with B.F. Skinner, behaviorists, and then we had a second phase, which is more, we thought it was just behavior and we need to train people. And kind of like they did a lot of work with animals. And they said, okay, it's just operant condition. And then we thought, oh, actually our thoughts are affecting our behavior too. So maybe we need to rework how we think. And then the third tier it's really mindfulness focused. It's not even focused on, I necessarily need to change this. It's, I need to be aware. I'm going to become aware of these behaviors without judgment. And simultaneously, but dialectical means, one of the definitions is holding two opposite things as true. And it's holding the acceptance and awareness of what things are without needing to change it, but also simultaneously working to improve. So it's very paradoxical in nature, but it does work. There's a lot of research on it. There's research specifically on using it for ADHD. It wasn't created for ADHD. It was actually created for borderline personality disorder, which is one of the more difficult mental health disorders to treat. And it's highly effective for that. But then we as a society, as a mental health field, had such high outcomes with DBT. We started noticing that it's really good for other things, including ADHD. So there's been several studies on using DBT skills training specifically for ADHD. And it's most effective.
Would that be also used for bipolar?
Yeah, it could be.
For the therapy?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a really good DBT group at Sanilac. I absolutely love it. I may or may not have absconded with one of the binders. And mostly so I can share with you. And the lady who created it was actually hospitalized for 26 months when she was 17 years old, misdiagnosed with schizophrenia, and was so in an uproar about it that she got back at that situation by getting her PhD in clinical psychology and creating an entire therapeutic platform, theory, everything. Absolutely wonderful. And then there's other things like coaching and skills training. And so kind of like today, we're doing a little bit of psychoeducation, teaching people. Psychoeducation is a little more intentional and a little more in a therapeutic setting, but really bringing back that mindfulness and that education and making people aware, oh, this is the thing. Like, these are the symptoms. It's not just rowdy children. This is a neurodevelopmental thing, the difference. I don't like calling it a disorder. I know technically it's a disorder, but I like thinking that it's just a difference. And then these are some effective CBT techniques. Structuring. I touched on that a little bit earlier. Behavioral activation and scheduling, problem solving, self-monitoring and feedback, and then mindfulness-based cognitive techniques. DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, is not the only mindfulness-based technique. There's also ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and there is mindfulness-based stress reduction, which are both of those are, there's research that shows that they're effective for ADHD as well. One CBT technique is SMART goals. This changed my life in college, and I recently, in the last couple of years, realized that not everybody knows about SMART goals. So it's a way of setting goals and keeping yourself accountable so that you actually complete your goal. Maybe, oh, I want to get a good job. Well, what does that look like? You could say you want to get a good job for the next 20 years. But with SMART goals, okay, I'm going to be specific. I want to get a job that pays X amount of money doing construction, or whatever it is. How am I going to measure it? So how am I going to know that I have this job? Or how am I going to know that I'm making steps closer to the job? Maybe we need to dial it back and say, I want to get some skills training in how to paint houses, or I want to join the union. And then achievable. Is this achievable? Is it realistic? And then time bound. Are these things that we can do? And I'm going to do this by a certain date. And then DBT skills, mindfulness, which is about we did a little bit of that earlier, just kind of slowing down and paying attention to the things that might seem difficult. With ADHD, people have a really hard time being in that headspace. So mindfulness-based meditation, yoga, I don't know about all of you. First time somebody asked me to meditate for 20 minutes, I about lost it. I thought, oh, this feels like forever. And then I got on that watch. You're supposed to do, right? And I was like, it's been 2 minutes. I thought it'd been an hour. And I don't have that experience now. I could meditate. It's difficult. I can't really get past the 45-minute mark. I do know people who have done 10-day silent meditation retreats, which is daunting, but I've just heard how beneficial it is, how helpful it is to slow down. Maybe mindful eating. I mean, how often do we go home and where'd the bag of chips go? I just opened it. Or I ate that whole pizza and I didn't even pay attention. And how often do we think, oh, I'm eating this one blueberry, and noticing the texture of the blueberry, noticing the taste of the blueberry, and just really savoring it, and just taking the time to slow down and do that is really beneficial for people with ADHD. And I would argue that it's beneficial for most people. And then distress tolerance, building skills. There's different skills in dialectical behavioral therapy that help you increase your distress tolerance. So maybe when that person cuts you off in traffic, you just get really upset. And this kind of helps increase that. So maybe it's not a person in traffic, or maybe you're not getting as upset or staying as upset for as long. It'll just, the more you practice it, it's like building a muscle, working out. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And then emotional regulation. There are also emotional regulation techniques. So you're getting upset really quickly, but you're able to get yourself back to basic. And then interpersonal effectiveness. There's a lot of good DBT skills because something that people with ADHD also struggle with is relationships, and appropriate boundaries, and effective communication. Because a lot of times people with ADHD they'll talk over people or blurt out the answer before the question's even asked. And their girlfriend's saying, hey, let me finish my question first. I want to finish my question. And they're, but that was the question you were going to ask, right? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. But with that kind of increasing your impulse control will really help with interpersonal effectiveness. There's also skills and techniques for how do I communicate something without hurting somebody's feelings? Or how do I communicate my point while honoring how somebody else feels without running over them? And those are challenges that show up, I think, for a lot of people, but also it's a little more pronounced, in my understanding, with people with ADHD. And then the fourth one, radical acceptance, which is kind of what I talked about before, where it's just completely accepting yourself as you are. Yes.
Is there a reason there's 2 fourths?
Yes. And that's because I didn't set up a number, right? I might notice it.
Well, like, you said the 4th one, and I was like, the 4th one was interpersonal, and I'm like, okay, I'm missing it.
You were much more mindful than I was.
Sorry.
No, thank you.
Radical acceptance, what is it again?
Yeah.
I didn't get what it was.
Oh, there's a squirrel. But radical acceptance is, and I have a handout that I will pass yeah, it's already there. But radical acceptance is just unconditionally accepting yourself as you are, accepting reality as it is, accepting existence as it is. And simultaneously,
That's radical.
yeah, it's like, I can't, I think a lot of times it comes up, it's really similar in my mind, at least. I know other people may feel differently, but with there's a comment, the serenity prayer. I was actually watching a superhero cartoon, and they were talking about it in that cartoon. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's like radical acceptance. Accepting the things you cannot change, changing the things you can, and having the wisdom to know the difference. And radical acceptance is very similar to that. And so medications, there are some really good medications. There's 2 predominant types, stimulants and non-stimulants. And we had to start developing stimulants, as a society, because some people do not react well to stimulants. So the non-stimulants, the stimulants they basically like increase levels of neurotransmitters in your brain to help increase your ability to have the higher level executive functions, like norepinephrine. And then the non-stimulants, at least Strattera is the one I looked into, it is a norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. So what it does is it stops your brain from taking the norepinephrine back up, so it increases the levels of that neurotransmitter by stopping your brain from reabsorbing. And it's really important to definitely don't self-medicate. Talk to a psychiatrist, talk to a doctor, because that is substance abuse is also a common thing with people with ADHD, because they're trying to function, they're trying to cope, and so maybe you're drinking tons of caffeine or doing other substances. And it's really important to do that under the direction of a qualified medical professional, because those things can, if you're not using them properly, they can really cause serious issues, including death. And then lifestyle changes. This is my favorite one. Exercising boosts your brain function. It's not easy. Prioritizing consistent sleep. That's huge. Maintaining a balanced diet, different things like omega-3s, magnesium. There's all kinds of stuff that is really good for increasing brain function and really just helping increase your chances of having those neurotransmitters increase naturally. Mindfulness practices are really important, and it's just really, I think with mental health, it's important to take a proactive approach. Like, yes, I I want help and I'm gonna get professional help. And also I'm gonna take full responsibility, be independent of this, and I'm gonna do everything I can to set myself up for success. And being gracious with yourself when you don't. And then there's other strategies like using timers, alarms, there's some techniques like time blocking and breaking tasks down into smaller, more manageable steps instead of like this big. There's a picture that used to go around as a meme. There's this picture of this ladder up into the sky and it had these really big steps. And then there was one next to it with little tiny steps. And the person on the little tiny steps was like halfway up, and the person on with the big steps was like still struggling to get to that next step because they couldn't reach it. And that would have been a really great picture for the slide, but I didn't give it till just now. Visual reminders are helpful. Routines are helpful. Routines are really helpful for people with ADHD. They don't have to think about it, they're doing it. Like they got the energy, they're gonna go. And I'm really preaching to mindfulness super hard because I think it's a really key skill and it's simple. You can literally do it anywhere and everywhere pretty much. So I've got some homework. So these are different handouts. I tried to create them in a way where they were very self-explanatory and effective. I also tried to keep them short. Don't feel like you have to do all of them. If you want to try one of them or two of them, if something speaks to you, I think it's wonderful. I got the ABC please skills for emotional regulation. And then I did the box breathing tool. The box breathing is also kind of part of the tip skill, but sometimes it's easier to just do box breathing for people. So I wanted to give as many resources as I could.
What is that?
Box breathing. So box breathing is you would inhale for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, and then repeat. And it's supposed to help people. If somebody's really upset, it's supposed to help them calm down. It's super simple to remember, easy to use, and if you actually do it, it's effective. I have a handout on